This module is over decision making. So we started with problem solving and thinking about how people work through obstacles. And we've done reasoning on how people make inductions, so they infer information. And now we're going to look at how they make decisions. So all of these processes are really tied together, but we're going to sort of keep each one separate because of the different research fields for them. So in decision making, a decision is a choice among several alternatives. And we're looking at the process where we decide which one to pick, okay, which is different than problem solving where you have an obstacle that you have to get to a goal state. Okay? So what you do is you take an assessment of the available actions and you pick which option you want. So sometimes decision making is really easy. What's for lunch? If you have any friends like mine, that can be difficult because we all have different likes and diets and desires. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, so bigger decisions. What house do you want to buy? What car? What are you going to do after school? So decision making runs the whole gamut from what do I want to wear today to what do I want to do with my life. We'll mostly look at the easy ones because that helps us understand the hard decisions a little better. Couple of theories in decision making. The first one is a normative theory. And these are called prescriptive models because they prescribe how we should act. So it tells us what we should do and outlines our rational choices given all of the things before us. Okay, the problem with that is that humans are not rational in the least, not at all. We have emotions, we'll pick things that seem like an irrational choice to others, but mostly this sort of theory is used by people in economics. What should the market do? What should you do given the market? Those sorts of things. And advertising. So they're trying to tell you what to buy. You should buy this thing because it's fantastic. That sort of thing. So prescriptive models aren't normally used in psychology because we know people are pretty bad at being rational. We'll talk about how we can see that in a minute. So instead we use descriptive models. So they focus on how we actually make decisions, which are a lot better explaining people. And usually people study gambling because it's an easy thing to get people to take in a research study. So people actually try because it's gambling, it's fun, and it's an easy task. So we'll talk about the Iowa gambling task. So the big descriptive theory is called the expected utility model. And what happens is they say that people make a decision tree. So what do I want to do tonight? Do I want to go to dinner with my friends or go to this local concert that I've heard is really good? Okay, so the first two are the options under consideration. So dinner versus concert. And then the options here are it should be a lot of fun if I go out to dinner with my friends, but it's going to cost me some money. If I go to the concert, it'll be some really awesome music that I like, but it's also going to probably be pretty loud. And I'm an old lady and I don't like my ears to ring for 3 or 4 days anymore. So we start with outlining the pros and cons for each decision. If you've ever made a pros and cons list, you've made a decision tree. So the alternatives are our different choices and the strategies available to you. So if you're trying to make a decision on which route to take to school. And so that's the branches of the tree. And then the beliefs are the bottom half of the tree, where it's an estimate of the likelihood of that outcome occurring if we select that option. So let me back up just a second. If I go to dinner, I'm going to make an estimate of how likely I am to have fun. So I've already listed that fun is an option, but now I'm going to put a number to that. I'm going to say the likelihood of me having fun is 50%. So that is what a belief is. So it's an estimate of the likelihood of that outcome that we've said should happen given this alternative if we pick that option. Okay. So we're going to use those beliefs to assign a probability to the different options. So let me show you how that looks. So the 75% here for fun, 50% for money, 90% for music, but 85% for loud. So that is my estimate of the likelihood of that happening if I pick either dinner or concert. So what do I do next? Now we're going to add consequences. So consequences are the negative or positive weight on that outcome. So it's a benefit or loss that you receive by making that choice. So the outcome is those results: fun, dinner, fun, money, music, and loud. The value to you is sort of a net worth. Like, how much do you like it? So I have my estimate of the likelihood of it happening. I have whether it's positive or negative, that's the consequence, and how much that means to me. So sort of, do I value having fun with my friends more than I value the music? That sort of thing. And so this whole thing put together is utility. It's the desirability of that value to you. So it's very subjective, which is good because people are all different. So the expected utility model is a combination of beliefs, consequences, and values to create utility. And so we assess those consequences, we assign the different values, and we weight those values by the likelihoods, pick the highest option. So it says that we sort of, in a decision-making model, do a bunch of unintentional math to decide which option we like the best. All of that put together is subjective utility, which is allows for people to make different decisions given the same beliefs. So it does assume that we are rational when we evaluate the likelihood of an alternative. So those probabilities, those beliefs. I'm going to show you in a little bit how that's probably not true. We're not very rational in any case. Okay. So here's how it works. I'm going to take each choice. I'm going to take the probability of their outcomes, that's the beliefs, with the consequences and the value, that's utility. I'm going to multiply, add them up, and pick the highest one. So I'm going to show you in the picture form. So what we've got here are our different choices. So these are the alternatives: dinner, concert. I have the outcomes. Okay. There we go. Sorry. I have my two outcomes. It's fun or it costs money. And it's music or it's too loud. The percentages, remember, are the estimates of the likelihood of it happening. That's beliefs. The positive or negative component on each one is the consequence. So I weigh fun as positive, spending money as a negative, music as a positive, loud as a negative. And then the what seems like sort of random numbers here are the value to me. So having fun is a 50, money is a 25, going to see my favorite band is 80, so it's really positive, like that's a big deal to me, and I can deal with the loud by standing in the back or wearing earplugs, so it's a small negative. All of those multiplied and added up are utility. So it says the utility of dinner to me is a 25, and the utility here of concert is a 55. So I would pick the concert because I weighted it so heavily. So utility is this bottom component here, whereas each piece adds up to create utility. So what you can do if you outline this sort of decision tree model, which is very similar to problem space theory, right? It's having trees, is look at when people decide risk versus loss. Okay, so people who are risk averse will prefer a certain gain, whereas over no gain or a loss. So if I do this thing, I will absolutely get $100. So they make these gambles where they say, if you pick gamble A, you'll make $100. If you pick gamble B, you might win $200. People who are risk averse will take the $100 over the $200 or nothing. People who are risk seeking prefer the chance to win the $200 even if it means they won't get anything. So I have two options. I have $100 or $200 or nothing. Okay, so people who are risk averse pick the 100, people who are risk seeking pick the 200. So we have different utilities for those numbers. And then for loss, some people will avoid gambles with any potential loss, no matter what the value of the gamble is. And this one's a little harder. Most of people are loss averse. They don't like to lose things. So if you give people a gamble of you'll lose $100 or you might lose $200, loss averse people tend to pick the you might lose 200 because I might not lose anything. So losses mean more to us. We don't like to lose things we have. And there's this cool thing called the endowment effect. Things that we have mean more to us because they're ours. And so you see this on like eBay or any place that sort of sells items where you're like, whoa, that is way too much money for that thing. That's the endowment effect because people believe it's worth more just because they have it. So what they did to test this was they gave a room of children and they were doing a supply and demand demo, and it sort of turned into an accidental experiment. And they gave half the children cups. And so they decorated the cups like a coffee mug, and then they were to sell them to the other half of the children. Because the children had decorated the coffee mug and it was their own, they wanted more for it than the children who were buying wanted to sell. So just by owning it, we think it's worth more. So how can we test the expected utility model? People aren't rational. Like, they're pretty terrible at rationality. So does this model work? Okay. So we can look at decision weights, those beliefs, the estimates of likelihoods of outcomes. Okay. So beliefs and decision weights are basically the same thing. What we tend to do is we overweight small probabilities. So the odds of you winning the lottery or any of those lottery games are very low, but people still buy lottery tickets even though it's not a rational choice. So we'll overweight probabilities that are very small. We tend to think they're higher than they are. Any sort of middle probability we'll completely ignore, and then we overweight certain probabilities. So we overweight the two ends, and then the middle we just kind of don't pay attention to. So this is sort of how that looks. On the low end, we overweight the low probabilities, and then usually towards the top, we'll overweight these as well. So everything here in the middle, we sort of underweight the likelihood of them happening. So let me give you an example. So the FBI classifies crime in the U.S. into categories of violent crime, murder, rape, assault, and robbery, and property crime, burglary, larceny, car theft. It's more complicated than that, but what percent of crimes do you think are violent? Okay. Now, what percent of accused felons plead insanity? And of the percent that plead insanity, how many of them are acquitted for insanity? And lastly, what percentage of convictions for everything are obtained by trial rather than plea bargaining? Okay, got those written down? Here are the answers. Okay, this is a little old, but still you get the idea. 12% of crimes are violent, so you probably should have overweighted that. And the insanity pleas use less than 1%. Okay. And then less than 0.25% are actually acquitted because of the insanity plea. So most people here, especially these two middle ones, tend to overweight those probabilities because you see it on TV. It seems more common than it is. And then what percent of convictions are obtained by trial rather than plea bargaining? It's less than 10%. And so all of these are in the small probability range, and so you should have picked numbers that were too large. So does the model work? Well, I've already shown you that we're not very good at the decision weights beliefs part. Now, decision weights are a little harder because they don't tend to be things that are subjectively useful to us. So estimating probabilities for violent crime is not the same as estimating whether or not I'm going to have fun, right? So we are a little better at beliefs than estimating things outside of our mental models, which would be the decision weights. But there are two other big issues with expected utility. The first one is transitivity. So logically, if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. Oh no, it's the reasoning section again, right? Just that makes sense. If I am taller than my friend Carly and Carly is taller than Tracy, then I'm taller than Tracy. End of story. Okay? But people don't stick to that rule. So if they pick, we give them two bets, A and B. You want to bet $100 to win $100 or to maybe win $200, and they pick the $100 one. And then if we give them the $200 or $50, I'm not very good at making these up off the top of my head, but if we give them bets and they pick A, and then we show them B and C, and they pick B, and then if we show them A and C, sometimes people pick C for no good reason. Here's an example. So, what they do, and so they give you this little spinny wheel thingy, and you get either $4.50 in the black area or $0 in the white area. And the gambles here, A, B, C, D, E, are how big the black area is. Okay, but the larger the black area, the less it pays off. So they've calculated this sort of expected value by the probability of winning times the payoff. Okay. And what'll happen is that people will, between like A and E, switch bets. And so their bets are intransitive. So if I pick A is greater than B because I have a larger payoff, the difference between A and B is really pretty small for probabilities, and I get the larger payoff with A. And then I say, well, B is greater than C because of the same issue. C is greater than D, and D is greater than E. But then if you give me A and E, people actually will pick E because the probability is so much higher. So with the two extremes, I will switch my choice around. Okay. The second big issue is procedural invariance. And this is just a bane in the existence of a lot of people's lives because this is the idea that two ways of asking the same question get you different results if you don't follow the rules. And that's very frustrating if you're like designing instructions and you realize people aren't getting your instructions. So if I ask the same question a different way, I should get the same result, but I don't. It's kind of frustrating. All right, so let me give you an example. Let's say there's a storm threatening the offshore drilling rigs outside of Texas. And if you don't do anything, everybody's going to die. So you have to pick a rescue plan. If you pick option 1, 150 people will be saved. If you pick option 2, there's a 50% chance everyone will be saved. Right? Most people pick option 1 because it's a sure bet. Well, at least we'll save 150% people. 150 people. Whereas if I pick option 2, it kind of sounds like I only have a 50-50 chance of rescuing anybody. And sometimes people risk-seeking people will pick option 2. Now, only thing I have changed here is the word saved and died. These are actually the exact same options. If option 3 is enacted, 150 people will die. Well, that was the unwritten undertone for the last example. And then if option 4 is enacted, there's a 50% chance that everybody will die. Okay. If you picked option 1 in the first one, you're likely to pick option 4 in the second one. And so people will switch choices given a slight wording change. So the expected utility model doesn't account for the procedural invariance and transitivity because it says that you should be rational on the utility weights every single time. Procedural invariance is also called framing. So the way the word problem's worded makes a difference. So two terms, they mean the same thing. The cool thing about framing is it brought about another theory, okay, and this is called prospect theory. So prospect theory is a expected utility model shoot-off. It's like the same types of decision making in the background, but their argument is that the perception of the situation is the determinant of the behavior and not just some fancy math. So given the perception, that the frame of the question, we're going to change our expected weights. So when you change the word to die from live, that changes the mood, if you will. So I'm going to adjust all of those weights and still make a decision. So prospect theory is not really that different from the expected utility model. It just says that the reason you get procedural invariance and transitivity is the way that it's framed at the moment, and that changes people's estimates of outcomes and beliefs and values, that sort of thing. The second big descriptive theory is bounded rationality, and this one's more popular. So Simon, that I talked about in chapter 1, is the person who came up with bounded rationality. So our choices are rational as long as they fit within our cognitive limits. So he really looked at how much information people can process, and then said, well, you're sort of bounded by how, like working memory and attention and all the physical limits of the system. And so we're rational as long as it's within those bounds. So he has two big rules. The first one is satisficing, and that is spelled correctly. It's a really strange word. And satisficing is the good enough principle. So it's a method of decision making that finds the option that is good enough, and then you're done. So we don't like to think that hard, and so we will make a decision as soon as it matches enough of our criteria. So it provides a good outcome without a lot of mental effort, because it takes really too much of our brain to optimize. Optimizing would be the reverse, looking at every single possible combination of outcomes until you finally make a decision. There's a lot of research that shows the more choices we have, the less happy we are about our choices, because we had so many other choices. So you see this with like class scheduling. You know plenty of people, maybe you, who just say, this fits here, this fits here, this fits here, good enough. And then I have plenty of advisees that will try 85 different schedules until they go nuts because they're trying to make the perfect schedule, which doesn't really exist. So how do we satisfy? We mostly satisfy. It's two heuristics. So there's representativeness. So we look at the decisions and see how much they match our mental model of the way the world should work. So how representative is this of my previous choices? My model of what I normally do. Availability is a judgment of how much it matches examples of decisions I've made before. So that's the previous choices one. So the first one's really like, this matches who I am. And the second one matches, this is what I've done before. And this is the work of Daniel Kahneman's lab on how we build these mental models and make decisions from them. So the way we test this is called the Iowa Gambling Task. This link will take you to an example. The other thing you can do is go take the experiment online, which is on the Take the Labs page. And so what it is it's an uncertain decision-making task, and you get 4 card decks laid out. And you're supposed to earn money by picking different cards, and they have win-loss ratios associated with them. Okay. So here's an example. You've got your person here who has to pick deck A, deck B, C, or D. Check, check, check. And what will happen is each deck is sort of loaded against you. So for deck A, every card wins $100, but some cards lose you either $150 or $350, up to $350. The odds of it losing you money are a half. So overall, that deck is losing you money. And then, okay, for deck B, it's losing me money too. And deck B is really bad. Check it out. Oh my goodness, right? But deck C at first doesn't look very good because it's not really winning me that much money. Every once in a while it will lose me some money. But overall it's going to win me money. So what happens is people start by picking decks A and B back and forth until they hit those really negative consequences, and then they start picking decks C and D. Now these are randomized every time, so it's not always the first deck is good and the last deck is bad. But this is sort of how it's set up. So there are good decks that win money over time, but in low amounts. And then there are bad decks. They lose money over time, but they have big wins. So people start by going for the bad decks because they have those large payoffs, and then eventually they switch and start going for the good decks. Even if they can't quite tell you that's why they're going for them. So people who are normal controls will switch decks after playing for a while. Okay. And what they do is they hook you up to these little hand pieces that measure how much your skin sweats. It's called galvanic skin response, or GSR. And if you look at what happens when people pick bad decks, they actually start sweating more. So it's sort of a nervousness thing. And that happens before they can tell you that the deck is bad. So your brain figures it out first, and then later it sort of cues you in. If you damage the prefrontal cortex, the thing that does everything, people will not switch decks. They continue to go for the bad decks. And they also do not show any galvanic skin response to those bad decks. So they're the part of their brain that figures out, oh, yeah, this is not a good idea, isn't there anymore. So we can tell that decision making is also part of the prefrontal cortex. So to sum all this up, we have got the expected utility model, which is a descriptive model of decision making that explains a lot of our choices that we make. But what we really have to think about is bounded rationality. So we can look at these expected decisions, but they're only rational as long as they're within our cognitive limits. And there are two sorts of ways that we make those decisions, either representativeness or availability. And then the way to study this sort of thing is to use the Iowa gambling task, or a forced choice gambling task. Do you want this one or this one, like we talked about at the beginning?